Good afternoon. This is the 3rd of April. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with the dramatic conclusion of the international nuclear talks and a framework accord between Tehran and 6 world powers in Lausanne. A short time ago, the Security Cabinet here in Israel declared its unified and strong opposition to the pact after the ministers emerged from a special session called to discuss the ramifications of the deal. Ahead of the meeting, the spokesman for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu slammed the framework negotiations with Iran.
This framework is a step in a very, very dangerous direction. It leaves Iran with an expansive nuclear infrastructure, not closing down not even one Iranian nuclear installation. It leaves Iran with thousands of centrifuges to continue enrichment, and it allows Iran to conduct research and development to build new and better centrifuges. The single goal behind the Iranian nuclear program is to build nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, this framework lends legitimacy, international legitimacy, to this effort.
Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed his extreme disappointment with the deal, telling U.S. President Barack Obama during a telephone call that it threatens the survival of the State of Israel. Netanyahu argued that the agreement lacks necessary safeguards and insisted that it will pave the way for the development of nuclear weapons by the hardline Islamic Republic, which has repeatedly vowed to destroy Israel. He went on to point out that Iran is currently boosting the armies of its terrorist proxies to attack the Jewish state, and that because this accord legitimizes Tehran's nuclear program and bolsters its economy, it will result in the increase of its aggression and terror, as well as heightened nuclear proliferation in the region and the probability of major war. Netanyahu stressed that the alternative is to stand firm and to increase pressure on Iran until the achievement of a better deal. Obama reportedly defended the framework, saying that it represents significant progress toward a comprehensive solution that would verifiably ensure a peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program and sever all avenues for it to acquire atomic weapons. According to the U.S. president, the deal in no way diminishes Washington's concerns in respect to Tehran's sponsorship of terrorism nor its threats toward Jerusalem, and that his administration remains steadfast in its commitment to Israel's security. To that end, Obama told Netanyahu that a U.S. security team will now increase consultations with the Israeli government about strategies to even further strengthen long-term security cooperation. Now let's take a look at that deal that emerged late yesterday, capping exhaustive and often contentious talks. It offers an outline on limits to be placed on Iranian nuclear development, specifically aimed at preventing its capacity to produce arms. In exchange, the Islamic Republic was promised an end to years of crippling economic sanctions, but only if negotiators transform the proposal into a comprehensive pact that negotiators will now try to formulate over the coming 3 months. If the understandings reached on Thursday are implemented, it would mark the first time in more than a decade of diplomatic efforts that Iran's nuclear program would be scraped back. The accord commits Tehran to making significant cuts in the number of its centrifuges, which are necessary to spin uranium gas to levels that are used in nuclear warheads. Just over 5,000 of the nearly 20,000 centrifuges already installed or running at Iran's primary enrichment site would be allowed to operate, and much of its enriched stockpiles would be neutralized. In addition, a planned reactor would be reconstructed, rendering it incapable of producing weapons-grade plutonium. Monitoring and inspections by the UN Nuclear Agency would be enhanced, as many of the nuclear limits remain in place over the next decade, while other aspects are to continue for between 15 to 20 years. And punitive measures against Iran will be suspended by the U.S., the United Nations, and the European Union after the International Atomic Energy Agency has confirmed Iran's compliance. Despite the official statement that the framework has been accepted by all parties, the Iranian delegation adamantly demanded that only a vague statement be made public, while the U.S. pushed for the release of concrete commitments. In an apparent compromise, mention of some of the details were noted in the general statement, while others were saved for a more detailed position paper that was issued by the White House and the State Department. While Obama is hailing the framework agreement as a deal that will help make the world safer, He's also cautioning world powers to keep up their guard.
Let me reemphasize, our work is not yet done. The deal has not been signed. Between now and the end of June, the negotiators will continue to work through the details of how this framework will be fully implemented, and those details matter. Remember, I have always insisted that I will do what is necessary to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, and I will. But I also know that a diplomatic solution is the best way to get this done. Of course, this deal alone, even if fully implemented, will not end the deep divisions and mistrust between our two countries. We have a difficult history between us.
The U.S. president also related to Israeli objections and warned the U.S. Congress against any efforts to scuttle the deal.
If, in fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu is looking for the most effective way to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon, this is the best option. And I believe our nuclear experts can confirm that. That there will be no daylight, there is no daylight, when it comes to our support for Israel's security and our concerns about Iran's destabilizing policies and threats towards Israel. Finally, it's worth remembering that Congress has, on a bipartisan basis, played a critical role in our current Iran policy, helping to shape the sanctions regime that applied so much pressure on Iran and ultimately forced them to the table. In the coming days and weeks, my administration will engage Congress once again about how it can play a constructive oversight role. I'll begin that effort by speaking to the leaders of the House and Senate today. If Congress kills this deal not based on expert analysis and without offering any reasonable alternative, then it's the United States that will be blamed for the failure of diplomacy.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was a principal negotiator in the nuclear talks, and he is describing the outcome as a milestone agreement.
I can tell you that the political understanding with details that we have reached is a solid foundation for the good deal that we are seeking. It is the foundation for a deal that will see Iran reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium by 98% for 15 years. It is a deal in which Iran will cut its installed centrifuges by more than 2/3 for 10 years. It is a deal that will increase Iran's breakout time, which was confirmed publicly today to be 2 to 3 months. And that is the time that it would take Iran to speed up its enrichment in order to produce enough fissile material for one potential nuclear weapon. And that will be expanded now under this deal to 1 year from those 2 to 3 months. We have agreed on the most challenging and overarching issues. But now there are a number of technical decisions that need to be made, and there are still policy decisions that have to be made. But we have the outline, we have the basic framing, if you will, the construction. And as we continue on, the United States and our P5+1 partners will exhibit the same vigilance, the same unity of purpose, the same comprehensive approach, and the same good faith among us that has brought us this far.
Despite such optimism, one Washington analyst is warning that many potential pitfalls exist that could still derail the deal.
There are very broad parameters in the deal, and while there are specific numbers, what the numbers mean are going to depend on very specific details that haven't been revealed yet. There certainly seems to be an impression of progress. But whether this actually will meet experts' assessment of the needs is one question. And then whether the actual specific deal will pass the muster of the governments in each country is another question. And we don't know the answer. There are also things that were left specifically vague. There's a reference in the American communique to specified agreements to deal with the potential military dimensions of the Iranian program, but doesn't specify what those are. That's a big deal. It's very vague about what the sanctions relief is and how it works, although the American statement is very, very clear that they can all be reimposed right away. And in an agreement like this, nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. And you can bet that if you think the negotiations over this agreement were hard and got stretched out and looked like they might not work, when it actually gets time to having an agreed text that people are going to stand by for 10 or 15 or more years, the negotiations are going to be much harder. The sides are going to dig in. We might get there. I think there's still a 50% chance that when push comes to shove, it'll just be very hard to get to where each side feels they need to get to. Very unclear. What happens if the Allies disagree about whether the Iranians are meeting their obligations? I see any number of potential pitfalls down the road. There's a lot there about centrifuges and how many of what kind you're allowed to have and how you can connect them. That's a very technical issue, but I can't imagine that there is complete agreement on exactly what's permissible, how they can be arrayed, what you can have where. I would imagine that there are understandings on one side and understandings on another. And while there's significant overlap, I would think that the American side or the Western side would say, we've locked this down. And the Iranian side will say, no, we still have some flexibility. There's a strategic question about what would happen if the P5+1 all agreed to a whole series of things. Congress doesn't. And then American allies in Asia say, well, who's being more reasonable? Who should we feel bound by, the P5+1 or the American Congress? And you could very well have a situation where the U.S., rather than leading an international coalition, ends up being isolated by an international coalition. And to me, that's one of the things the Iranian government is trying to do. They don't necessarily have to be reasonable enough for Congress. They just have to be reasonable enough for the P5+1. And if Congress decides to undermine the president on this, that may undermine the American position much more fundamentally than anything Iran could do directly.
The U.S. Congress was on recess when news of the Iran deal broke, but legislators opposed to the agreement are promising to take swift action when they return to Washington later this month. In a written statement, House Speaker John Boehner said that the outline of the deal is an alarming departure from the original goals of the White House. He also said that his visit to Israel and the Middle East this week left him very concerned over Iranian attempts to propagate terrorism. The Republican speaker added that it would be naive to think that Tehran won't use its nuclear program and any easing of economic sanctions to destabilize the region. In other news, the Jerusalem Magistrates Court today extended the remand of Niv Asraf for 5 days on charges that he falsified his own kidnapping. The IDF announced late last night that the 22-year-old Beersheba resident had been located in Kiryat Arba after 10 hours of intensive search when a soldier friend of Asraf reported that he'd been abducted in the West Bank yesterday. Efforts to locate the missing man are estimated to have cost the state several million shekels, involving the deployment of helicopters, setting up of war rooms, and mobilization of massive forces who were reassigned from other duties. The incident began yesterday afternoon when Asraf's friend notified police that the two were headed to Hebron to pray when their vehicle had a flat tire and that Asraf disappeared after he returned from going for help. The soldiers' suspicions were immediately aroused after they were sent to the scene and found all 4 tires in good condition and took him in for interrogation. The friend may also face charges for his role in the hoax. Turning abroad, and survivors of the biggest single terror attack on Kenyan soil in 17 years are describing scenes of horror when the Islamist Somali al-Shabaab terror group stormed a university and murdered at least 147 people yesterday. Around 80 wounded in the siege of Garissa University were airlifted to hospitals in Nairobi, about 200 kilometers away. Students say that the heavily armed terrorists lined up the undergraduates and asked them their religion. Muslims were immediately freed, but the Christians were executed, some by beheading, while others died when the gunmen hurled grenades and fired automatic weapons. Security forces exchanged gunfire for 15 hours with the assailants, who holed up among their hostages. There are still conflicting reports as to whether the incident was finally ended when the terrorists were shot dead by police or detonated their suicide vests. The evil mastermind of the attack has been named as known al-Shabaab leader Mohammed Kun. Local authorities say that the whereabouts of more than 500 students have yet to be established and that they expect the death toll to rise as they conduct a fuller inspection of the campus. According to Kenya's Interior Ministry, the bloodbath was reminiscent of the al-Shabaab attack on the Westgate shopping mall in the capital that claimed the lives of 67 people in 2013. And now turning to the Syrian civil war, and regime military aircraft bombed the main border crossing into neighboring Jordan with barrel bombs overnight after it was seized by forces opposed to President Bashar al-Assad. The al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front claims to have captured the Nasib crossing, although anti-government rebel groups dispute that, saying that they took control of the border late on Wednesday after it was closed by the Hashemite Kingdom. Security forces in Amman say the King Abdullah is now increasing security on his side of the border, and Syrian state television is reporting that Assad's army units are also regrouping in the area. The rebel alliance, calling itself the Southern Front, insists that it's still in control of the Nasib crossing and has chased away the Nusra Front. Before the war, hundreds of trucks passed through that choke point daily, transporting goods between both nations, Turkey and the Gulf states. Here at home, smoke wafted through the air this morning as the Jewish community burned the last remaining scraps of bread that is forbidden to eat during the week-long Passover holiday, which begins a short time from now at sundown. Most of the country will be pretty much shut down as families and friends gather for Seder, the traditional multi-course meal, and the reading of the Haggadah, the biblical story commemorating the exodus of the Jews from centuries of slavery in Egypt. Chametz, or leavened products, such as bread, are banned during the holiday. Those observing Passover eat matzah, or unleavened products, to symbolize how the Israelites had no time to let their bread rise during their flight from bondage. Before the holiday, the chametz is sold, including that belonging to the state. Prime Minister Netanyahu signed off on the sealing of the transfer in his role as acting finance minister until the coalescing of the new government.
אני תמיד נרגש מהטקס הזה שמסמל את המשכיות עמנו ואת תקומת מדינתנו, שאיפתנו להתחדשות, לשלום, לביטחון, לשגשוג, למען כל אזרחי מדינת ישראל ולמען עם ישראל. אנחנו נשב מחר כל בית ישראל לליל הסדר, נגיד לבנינו ובנותינו, כפי שאנו מצווים לעשות במשך אלפי שנים, ונזכור שבכל דור ודור קמים עלינו לכלותנו. אני מבקש למסור חג שמח וכשר לכל בית ישראל. אני מבקש מאזרחי ישראל ליהנות בחג הזה עם המשפחות, עם המשפחה הגדולה שלנו. מברך אתכם בחג כשר ושמח. חג שמח.
The nation's school children have been on holiday since the start of the week, and with many more vacation days ahead of them for the Passover festival. Many parents say that they're already going a little stir-crazy while looking for activities to keep their families busy. IBA News sent out our reporter Alexandra Jen to find something fun to do in Jerusalem, and we see what she found in this report.
So your kids are on vacation and you're looking for something for them to do. Or maybe you're visiting Jerusalem and looking for an interesting activity to do with a friend. Cinema City is a new entertainment complex in the capital. It boasts impressive cinemas, a variety of restaurants, shopping, and even an ice skating rink, at least for the duration of the holiday. So I decided to lace up my own pair of skates from my former days as a figure skater and give the ice a try. It feels great to be out there. So I'm done showing off, and now I'm going to ask ice rink manager Daniel a couple questions. So Daniel, why bring ice skating to Jerusalem?
So first we want to develop ice sport in Israel, like hockey, like curling, like figure skates. And we want also to make a happy holiday for all Israel.
Of course. And who funds this operation?
It's a Cinema City mall that we now here, and the Jerusalem Municipality Company, Ariel.
The Jerusalem Municipality has set up temporary ice rinks in different locations each holiday season for the past 5 years. Last year it was at the old train station. There are actually skating rinks in many of Israel's cities, like Holon and Eilat, but none to be found here in the capital. Daniel hopes that temporary rinks like the one at Cinema City will encourage growth and interest in the sport and ultimately the establishment of Jerusalem's very own permanent facility. If an icy adventure appeals to you, expect to pay 40 shekels for skate rentals and admission to the rink for a 30-minute session, or 35 shekels if you're a resident of Jerusalem. The rink is open from 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. except on Shabbat. And now, some skating tips for beginners. When you first get on the ice, always start with baby steps.
Very good, excellent.
Take your time while you adjust to the surface. If you feel off balance, put your hands on your knees to shift your weight forward and hopefully keep from falling. But if you do fall, just pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and keep on going. Alexandra Jen for IBA News.
I'm definitely going to the rink, and I'm taking Alex with me. Now turning to the weather, and the team tells us to expect a little light rain tonight that should subside tomorrow morning. We're also likely to see a drop in temperatures tomorrow, but it should still be pretty nice for the holiday. Here's the forecast to home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I'll be back at this desk tomorrow to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. Hope to see you then. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a wonderful evening, a very happy Passover, and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.